Hi, I'm Paul Guppy. I'm Senior Researcher at the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular weekly update about what our elected friends in the legislature are up to, passing laws and new regulations, new taxes that are really going to affect everybody across our state. Before I get to a quick rundown of the issues, I wanted to make a larger observation about what we observe as the dynamic in Olympia and even in the way public issues are covered across our state and even across our country. And that is, again, not news to most people, but we have really seen in our day-to-day research work a real shift in news sources. So as someone who has worked in the public policy area for decades, it's interesting to hear that the standard references of I saw on the news, I read in the Seattle Times, or even I read in the New York Times, that is pretty much disappearing. And we are also noticing a gap in people who still get their news from CNN, let's say, or some other legacy news source, increasingly appear to be uninformed. There are like huge blank spots of issues that they are completely unaware of, which everyone else is talking about. So that is a dynamic shift that we've seen in the last couple of years. But particularly in this session, we're noticing that the news sources that people talk about, where we're getting good information, are from online sources, X, open platforms, free press. I mentioned Center Square is another one. But there's a great diversity of sources out there. We always encourage people to do your own research, form your own opinion. But in the past, key legacy media organizations tended to dominate the agenda of the daily news, and we see that that's no longer the case. And it's surprising to kind of chat with people, and then you can always sort of tell if they are usually of a certain age, whether they are still following, old network news or cable news stations that have been around for a long time, or legacy newspapers. And that's an interesting change to watch, that history happening before your eyes, and the news world is really changing. So we noticed that. Along with that, we have also seen a vibe shift in the public debate just this year, starting from January. And that is much more open, honest, and respectful debate. We've seen that people are debating their own ideas, own opinions, whether they're in elected office or just members of the public, without fear of running into a woke backlash, that they're going to be canceled, that they're going to be called names. People still get called names plenty, including us, but it just has much less impact in the past. And people feel that they can express their opinions without being scolded by left-wing hall monitors. And that is really opening up a much fresher kind of debate, openness to new ideas. Even if you don't agree with them, there's kind of an exciting intellectual incentive to hear what other people have to say and then make your own assessment. That was being suppressed in the past. We're starting to see that come back. And the other key point there is I'm noticing more in the public debate, or even just in personal conversations, that when you hear certain woke code words, and we know what they are, when someone references, say, lived experience, or my truth, or do the work, those are turning out to be keys when, at least from our researchers' point of view, we just stop listening at that point, because we know that what follows is going to be a kind of ideological rhetoric that is not really open to considering new ideas, bills, what's being debated in the legislature. From our point of view, that just fades into the background, almost like the hum of freeway traffic. We move past it, don't pay attention to it. But we really are interested in it's supremely clarifying to just be open to what people have to say without passing fast judgments and weighing different opinions that way. So that's a change in the atmosphere that we're seeing, again, just in the last 2 or 3 months. And that really is a refreshing addition to our public debate. Now on to issues that are being considered in the legislature, and I have a number of bills here that I'll mention and give you a quick update on. One is a positive bill that has passed in the House last week on March 5th. It's HB 1285. This was introduced by Representative Skylar Rood. He's a Republican from Walla Walla, and this would provide for a financial literacy requirement to graduate from high school. This seems to make common sense. It was supported by a broad bipartisan coalition. Democrats and Republicans voted for it. It makes sense to teach high school kids how to handle money, how to be responsible, how to stay out of debt, how to plan for the future. What struck me as funny about this bill is that Representative Rude's requirements in the bill seem to be exactly the opposite of what our elected officials in government tend to do, the way they handle our tax money. But laying that aside, I think this will result in a more educated citizenry, how young people can get out into real life, handle bills and income and debt, credit cards, without mismanaging money and getting into trouble. That's a very positive thing. The other part about the bill that I thought was interesting was like, okay, bipartisan agreement on financial literacy. This bill is going to pass, looks great. Well, how about basic things like reading, math, science, geography? Those are areas where, according to state standards, students should be learning those in public schools. But the latest test scores show that Washington State students are really behind in learning those basic things. In fact, there's a case where a particular student is challenging that, and I'll get back to that towards the end of this presentation. The next bill is, again, a positive bill that passed, HB 1483, introduced by Representative Maya Gregerson from Tacoma, Democrat from SeaTac. This again passed the House last week by a wide margin, 94-1. And what the bill does is it allows the owners of electronic devices, cell phones and other kinds of devices, to actually repair those devices themselves, to be able to get the spare parts needed to fix a cracked screen or replace a battery or other parts in the phone or other laptops, other electronic devices. And to us, as a free market organization, we were surprised that you couldn't do that already. But it turns out that the companies that produce these devices just simply wouldn't allow people to access the parts needed to repair them. So this bill passed, again, strong bipartisan support. We're hopeful that the governor will sign it when it gets to him. And there are two primary benefits that we see here. The one is the obvious one that the Democrat sponsor was pushing for, and that is to authorize people to fix their own devices. But it would also create kind of authorized dealers, third parties that you could take your device to and that person would repair them. And it would also create a secondary market of used devices that have been refurbished or fixed, or maybe I should call them pre-owned instead of used. That's what they say. And again, we think that's good, a competitive market that will lower the price of access to these devices. But the second part, which I thought some of the more socialist-leaning folks in the legislature might not have noticed, is that one outcome of the bill is that it confirms an individual's ownership in the device. It basically says when you buy an iPhone or a laptop or a computer, you own that device. It's your personal property, and you should be able to control it and decide how to fix it, repair it, maintain it, throw it away, whatever you want, and not the company that sold it to you. So the important part for us is it's an affirmation of a property right in the individual who has bought something and therefore owns it. And part of that principle is that no outside party can control what you own. And so we think that's an important signal that this bill sends. And again, we hope that the Senate passes it and it goes to the governor. Next up is a bill that's not as positive. That is SB 5292. This would lead to, and there's something clever in this bill, it would lead to an increase in the family and medical leave payroll tax. Of course, the bill doesn't actually say that. The sponsors deny that that's what they're doing. It's the Paid Family Medical Leave Program. It's a state payroll tax. In Washington State, we pay more payroll taxes than almost any other state in the country, in addition to federal. This is one of those. The bill confirms that the payroll tax rate is 1.2% on everything you earn, and that's not going to change. That's what the bill says. However, it changes the formula by which the agency calculates what the tax is and sets a standard that says that the fund that provides this benefit has to be, quote, adequately funded. And therefore, what it does is authorize a tax increase. So this reflects the principle that once an entitlement or payroll tax is in place, it's sold as being wonderful, beneficial. This is going to be great. It's not that expensive. Don't worry about it. And then the government comes along a few years later and begins to crank up the tax rate. There's a two-step process that's used to increase taxes for us, and this is purely for political cover. You see this pattern repeated all the time. Is step one, the legislature votes for authorization to raise a tax or create a tax. Few years go by, people get used to it, they're not paying attention. Step two is start raising the tax. This is about to happen also with the property tax cap that's in place now, where local, state governments, county, city are now limited in raising property tax collections by 1%. The Democrats are working on passing a bill to increase that cap to 3%. So they're going to triple the amount of property tax that can be collected at each jurisdiction. Always remembering that someone's property, your house, might be covered by 6, 8, or 10 taxing districts, all of which could increase their take by 3%. Members who vote for this bill, it's controversial between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans are against it. But those who vote for it, of course, will quickly say, hey, I'm not passing a property tax. I'm not raising your property taxes. That's not what the bill does. Instead, it gives permission for other officials to raise your property taxes. And of course, that will automatically happen if it passes. So that's not a good trend. And I think we think it's something that the public needs to watch out for. Next item is a bill that, again, we consider to be an abuse of an existing program. Same problem, and that is paying unions to go on strike. So this bill, SB 4051, was introduced last year. It was defeated. Lawmakers on both parties rejected it. It is now back. The powerful public sector unions, in particular in our state, strongly support this bill for the obvious reason that they would like to receive unemployment insurance benefits out of the public treasury when they call for a strike. This is not what unemployment insurance was set up for. In fact, that term insurance implies that it's mitigating risk. If a person loses your job through no fault of your own, then there's a public program to cover people when they don't have income. Going on strike is a positive decision that is made by human beings. It's not from economic conditions or because a company goes out of business. And so this will create a huge incentive for unions to go on strike, number one. Number two, any interest group would love to get money out of the Treasury to support their political activities. That's what this is. And number three, it undermines public confidence in the UI program, unemployment insurance program, which dates back to the 1930s, dates back to the Depression. It's got wide support among the public because it's for that safety net purpose when people lose their job. So undermining trust in the program, we think, is the number one problem. The financial impact is another problem. But the main thing is creating a political slush fund that diverts money from workers across the state into a kind of strike fund that unions can tap into. They can claim, hey, we're on strike, so we're getting unemployment benefits. That bill is moving. It passed the Senate, and well, the Senate was voting on it, and I haven't seen the outcome of it yet. So I actually have to get an update on that. The next one has to do with paying for money for school supplies, operating costs. That is SB 5192, introduced by Twina Nobles. She's a Democrat from a district south of Seattle. And this provides your standard education formula that goes out to school districts. It would provide $1,656.50 per student to school districts to pay for materials, supplies, and operating costs, which again is something that everybody agrees with. As a researcher, I always think it's funny when I see a number like that. It makes it look like it's very precise, scientific. Boy, they really worked on it. Pretty sure that they just made that up and threw it out there because it looks accurate. Could be a different number. But the main problem is safeguards in how this money is spent. So on the Senate floor, Senator Braun, leader of the Republicans, offered an amendment to provide guardrails that would assure that this money went to the purpose it was intended for, materials and school operations. That amendment was defeated. So that raises the suspicion that the money that this bill would have could be diverted later on. It will be subject to collective bargaining. It will be subject to unions claiming that that money can be diverted into other purposes, salaries, benefits, things like that. And that looks like a setup for what that's going to be. My suspicion when I watched the debate on this amendment was, why isn't everybody voting for this? I mean, Senator Braun's amendment simply said that the money provided in the bill had to go for what the bill was for. That's what everybody was voting for. Instead, Senator Braun was shut down. That amendment didn't pass, and then later on, the Senate did pass the overall bill. Now it heads over to the House. The next issue I'll discuss is a bill that would help lower healthcare costs in our state. Always a good thing. The bill is HB 1114. This is another step in a trend that we've been doing, a positive trend in joining with other states in accepting the professional licenses of people from other states. In this case, it's for respiratory therapists who move to Washington State. They are licensed, experienced in another state, and then Washington accepts their credentials. This is a positive policy idea. It's a little bit like driver's licenses. You drive to another state, your Washington State driver's license is good. Our only concern about this is how narrow it is. It is ticking off. We've done this with nurse licensure as well last session. So this is a positive trend, but our concern is that why the baby steps? Why not just open up Washington's healthcare system to skilled employees, doctors, nurses, other technicians that are needed? As long as they are qualified and legitimate in another state, they should be able to come and work in Washington State. That would open up job opportunities, but the main thing is it would help lower the cost of healthcare in our state, and that's something that benefits everybody. So this bill, again, passed by a large bipartisan vote. Anything where Republicans and Democrats can work together, we think is building more confidence in our government and moves in a positive direction. Next is another piece of good news. Last year, there was a bill proposed to impose a $2 tax on every electronic device sold in the state. Our own Mark Harmsworth, who's quite the investigative hound dog, he ferreted this out last session, and he wrote about it, and the bill died. That bill, which is HB 1517, was introduced again in this session, and again, it looks like it died in committee. So Mark is the whistleblower on this, and the reason is because he read the language of the bill, and it applies to every digital device. So Mark started to think, well, what would that be? Cell phones, obviously, maybe computers, but it turns out that almost every electrical appliance you can think of these days, a refrigerator and stove, kitchen appliances, that they are electronic devices, they're digital devices. So they all have chips in them, and they would all fall under this bill. And so you would pay a $2 tax on virtually every electronic device that you owned. Flushing that out into the open gets members very nervous about voting for it. It hits consumers at a time of high inflation. And for the second time in a row, that bill has died in committee. As I always say, like Dracula, bills will come back from the dead. And I would expect to see this $2 tax coming back in the future, but for this year, it's done. And with that, I'll move on to two non-legislative items that we're tracking related to education that we think are important just in principle, and I'll wrap up with those. One of them, a story that has made national news, is a high school girl student in Tumwater who refused to play on a sports team against a boy, a transgender athlete that was on the other side. She was concerned about being injured. The school district, they changed their rules, but the problem we're having is that the student was investigated by the school district for violation of rules about harassment and bullying. This case has gone all the way to the federal government. The Civil Rights Division of the Education Department is looking into this as a violation of Title IX. We are concerned about civil rights and equality, access to for girls and women to play in sports. We think that's important on its merits. But there's an added dimension that we also think is important, and that is freedom of speech. So the fact that this woman, this girl student rather, she said, I'm playing against a boy. He's a male student. And so she was actually sanctioned for those words. And that's a concern to us, that people are not able to honestly express their opinion, no matter what it is. And students shouldn't be punished because of what they say. So we see this as more of a civil rights issue regarding free speech, regardless of how the sports issue comes out. And we also think that the controversy, once again, undermines parent and public confidence in public schools. So we can debate these larger issues about free speech, but when they end up harming the education mission of the Tumwater School District, that just leads an incentive to parents to lose confidence in the schools. Why is my family engaged in this controversy? And families begin to look for alternatives. And that's one reason that we're in support of school choice. School choice means if you're unhappy with whatever, doesn't matter what it is, whatever situation is going on with your child in a particular school, you have the freedom to move that child someplace else and take the money to which the student is entitled with them. So portable funding that goes with the student. That's the principle of school choice. It's expanding in other states. We keep looking for indicators of where it may be picking up traction here. This controversial Tumwater case feeds into that. So we're looking at that dynamic. And speaking of funding, there's another interesting case, not in Washington State, but there is a high school honors student who graduated from high school, but she can't read. She herself admits she's illiterate. And so she is suing her school district because she was deprived of the education to which she was promised. And again, we're observing this case from afar. We want to see how it comes out. But if we have a system where the Washington State Constitution says that every child is entitled, it's the paramount duty of the state to fund an education for every child, and then the school district doesn't deliver that education, what is the recourse for the student and the family? Here is a student who has devoted years to being in public education. She gets to be 18. The school district hands her a high school graduation certificate, and yet she has not actually received the education that she was promised. So we will see how this court case comes out, but it is an interesting way of providing outcomes and benchmarks to make sure that students are really getting the education that they've been promised. Again, the safeguard ends up being school choice. If your child is in school and they can't read, you should have the option to transfer that child with resources to an alternative that will provide the education that that student has been promised. So those are some of the top issues that we're tracking. And with that, I'll wrap up and I'll be back next week with another update. Thank you.